Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't wanna know. Welcome to Cinphomaniac. This is Marcus speaking. I'm here to bring you a special episode, the second of our special bonus episodes covering the Evangelion franchise, particularly with regards to the release of this recent final film, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, which saw its international release on Amazon Prime, streaming there. As of August 13th of 2021. Now, since then, I've watched the film 3 times, and I want to give my sort of thoughts, review, reaction, if you will. And this is following up from the previous episode in which I recapped the overarching franchise with particular attention to the original TV series and the end of Evangelion film, which was at the time the original ending, if you will. There's some asterisks there that is explained in that previous episode. So if you haven't listened to that and you're unfamiliar, well, 2 things. One, I'm going to spoil everything that happens in this movie. This new movie, and the previous episode already spoiled a lot that was in all the preceding material. Not everything, but a lot of it. Some of the biggest sort of twists or surprises are explicitly detailed there. I look at that as say, hey, if you remember watching it years ago but haven't visited since and you want a recap, that's there for you. Also, if you're just a person who's curious and doesn't really care about spoilers for whatever reason, if anything, it might enhance your enjoyment of the series diving in, because rather than be in the sort of unsure, confused state that a lot of it is, which I'll admit is part of the experience, you'll be like watching it like someone who's already seen it to some extent, and experiencing it that way, which might be interesting. I don't know. It's up to you. I'm not in charge of anyone else's life here. That being said, this episode is just perfect for anyone who is familiar with everything and just watched the new movie, wants to know what I think. Well, you're going to get that. But to start, because this was one thing I didn't too extensively cover in my previous episode, I want to take us back through the previous 3 Rebuild films. In fact, the way Amazon presents the new movie is pretty interesting. They have almost like a TV style recap segment at the top of the film that includes a recap of 1.0, recap of 2.0, and a recap of 3.0. For my purposes, I'm just going to breeze through most of 1.0 and 2.0, except for some key points that I think are going to be relevant to talking about 3.0 plus 1.0. And pay a little more attention to 3.0 in particular, because I didn't really cover it too much on the previous episode, and it's obviously the direct lead into this movie. So to understand this movie's beginning and also some of the circumstances around the making of this new movie, you have to understand 3.0 from a particular perspective. Okay. Evangelion 1.0, You Are Not Alone. That's the English title of the film, the first Rebuild film. So 1.0 retells the story more or less is the same as it was in the first 6 episodes of the original NGE TV series. But there's something I want to highlight about that whole faithful approach and how it revolves around my opinion of that movie and to a lesser extent 2.0. And this doesn't have to do with plot. See, one of the things that is really amazing to me about this final film, and to a large extent 3.0 as well, that preceded it, is the look of the movies. The look of the movies, if you go back to 1.0, is a bit different. This was coming out in 2007, and it was because it was a more or less faithful recreation. It really just kind of took this modern digital, sort of the digital animation approach with digital coloring and digital composition to designs, the character designs as they were in NGE. So those Sadamoto designs, as well as just straight up shot for shot recreations. And that kind of led to a weird effect because those character designs and those shots as they originally were composed were, done in a much softer looking cell animation style that was, with film grain, all that stuff. It just looks different. And, to some extent, I want to say, I'm not saying 1.0 looks bad. It actually looks really good. It looks about as good as anything that's being given that sort of style can. And it doesn't look, to I think an uninitiated, you might not think it looks terribly different than the latter two Rebuild films, but there is a distinction. I'm not even talking about the uses of CGI or the detailed backdrops or all those things. And all those things are used relatively well in 1.0, though a lot less than they'll be used in the future two films. But yeah, just being constrained to those designs and that template, I think, gave it a sort of strange look in a way, at least by comparison. I think on its own, it's fine. But when you compare it to 3.0 and 3.0 plus 1.0, it's noticeable, at least to me. And obviously, you also have that change in aspect ratio, which is interesting. So that look carried over into 2.0 to an extent, though. I think you start to see, because of the more original scenes, there's a little bit more leeway. But once you get to the time skip in 3.0, they kind of like allowed them, with all the new characters and just that, time skip and character design differences, they got to do presumably entirely new character sheets. And as a result, the sort of style of the drawing kind of changed into a kind of I would say, a looser looking style with simpler lines and more minimal. And that really works well when you have digital sort of composition and coloring, because it kind of it balances it out a little better, I think, and certainly allows for more fluid animation, which is really great as well. And boy, is the animation in this final film they blew every dollar, man. Every dollar on that frame is just gorgeous. Okay, but yeah, getting back to just the point of what 1.0 was, as a product, as a story product. Obviously, it retells the first 6 episodes, but it introduces at the end the idea that Kaworu's out there, he's awakening, and you see him with his the coffins and the circle. We get back to that in this final movie, so put a pin in that. Then you move on to 2.0, which introduces Mari, has the first of what will become a trend with Rebuilds, 2.0, 3.0, and then this final film of an intro action sequence heavily featuring or more or less starring Mari. The 1 in 3.0 is a little balanced with Asuka, but 2.0 and 3.0 plus 1.0, it's the Mari show basically. So that's one trend, and these are the segments that tend to really be liberal with the use of CG to an extent. Okay, so that with 2.0, the important thing to note, then it really comes back in this final film, and it's something this final film had to deal with. The changes made to the story, especially at the time, really kind of felt like, is Anno making this story more conventional? Is he simplifying? Because now the stretch of episodes that it's being covered, yes, you have the first part, which is the 3 pilots kind of just fighting Angel's arc, which is really reduced. And then you have the later where it's supposed to get more psychological and introverted, that's what surrounds the Unit 3 and then Shinji's Beast Awakening thing in episode 19 in the original series, right? That's those episodes around it, starting with like episode 14, 15. So, that's where you start to get that more internal stuff. And all that was stripped out. And not only that, the character of Asuka and Rei were basically used to be like, we're in love with Shinji, and Shinji has this crush on Rei, and Rei's whole thing now is like, I want Shinji's happiness. And so I'm going to talk to Gendo about how do I make Shinji happy and throw him a dinner party. And Asuka's jealous, but then she just kind of gets over it at the last minute before she's the one who boards Unit 3. That's one of the other changes. There's a good payoff to that in this final film, thankfully. But yeah, so those changes, they made sense in terms of simplifying the story down and simplifying the structure, but they had this lingering effect of removing a lot of the complexity, a lot of the weight, a lot of the sort of a psychological density, a lot of the darkness, quite frankly, from the series. I mean, obviously, the Unit 1 killing or destroying Unit 3 segment is pretty faithful with all the violence of that, and the earlier fight with I forget which angel, the big giant one that descends from space and they have to hold it up, that is a cavalcade of blood. It's bloodier than ever, but it just I don't know, it just lacks something there. So 2.0 is not my favorite. I like it better than 1.0 because there is difference, and I do like the finale, despite the fact that when I originally saw it, I was really thrown off by the Shinji Rei stuff where it's all about Rei, and then it's like, but I think what turned me around was just simply just the sheer, just like, whoa, the set piece itself. And obviously the whole point of it is like, oh, this is where things get really different. Of course, there's a catch, because the post-credit scene, as it's originally seemingly meant to be interpreted, we have to get back to that when we talk about this new movie, is Kaworu comes down and stops supposedly this third impact. And it seems like, oh, everything would be fine. Of course, when audiences come back for 3.0, they find out that's not true. That while it's still, quote, the near third impact, the world got really fucked up. The whole planet's red now. Everything is messed up. And of course, because we're 3.0, the thing about 3.0, this is a good place to get into it now. 3.0 is famously entirely Shinji's point of view, which means you don't really know what the other characters are thinking. You only see them when they're in the room with him. And since Shinji's the one character who, like us, has no idea what happened in these 14 years, the last thing he remembers is the end of 2.0. He's like, what the hell happened? And we're like, what the hell happened? And everyone, including Misato and like all these characters that we think of a certain way, are completely different now. Misato's this ice cold lady who's totally bundled up in her war gear, and there's all these new characters, and they hate Shinji, and everyone hates Shinji. And it's like, to some extent, the fans, have always, a certain segment of the fans have always hated Shinji, but now it's being reflected on screen. So it's a very uncomfortable thing, I think, and maybe a reckoning for some people. Was that Anno's intention? Well, I think Anno had a lot of intentions with all this stuff in 3.0. But before I even get to what those are, let me just finish kind of recapping 3.0 because it's really interesting. So Shinji awakens on the Wonder after Asuka and Mari collect him from space, essentially, along with Unit 1. Unit 1 is used to be incorporated into this giant new ship, a totally different type of technology and thing than anything we've seen before. That's the thing. Not this 14-year skip is also used to kind of use totally more futuristic kind of technologies and things than were not in the original series, nor in 1.0 and 2.0, which stuck to that original Tokyo 3 kind of world, right? So now we're way beyond that. And he's given the DSS choker and all this stuff. And then he's like committed. He's like, I saved Rei. I know I saved Rei. Everyone's lying to me. And then he hears Rei's voice. So he's like, what the hell? Turns out a Rei, not the Rei, has come to rescue him in her Unit 9, new Ava. That's the thing. 3.0 really starts to introduce a lot of new Avas. In addition to the normal Ava types, we also have these new sort of weird mechanical widget monster type Avas, which are called Mark, Ava Mark this, Ava Mark this, as opposed to units. And it's interesting. We get the impression, oh, these are wielded by Nerve. So Wheelay, which is Misato's organization, and Nerve are engaged in this war. We don't even, in 3.0, it's actually not made clear what the grounds of the fight really are. I mean, that's the biggest thing when you look at this new movie. This new movie had attempted to simplify things down in a way where things were kept deliberately vague and confusing in 3.0+1.0. It illuminates things and makes it simpler to understand, and also like, oh, I can get with what Wheelay is doing. I can get with why there's a fight that matters. And you could look at that as 3.0 plus 1.0 making up for bad storytelling decisions in 3.0. I think that can be a fair assessment. But the point is, the lack of information you have in 3.0, for better or for worse, is an intentional thing, clearly. Okay. Maybe Anno didn't have all the answers then, I don't know, but either way, it's not given to you. And the information you're given in the final film is also deliberate in the same sense. Shinji's learning it. You're learning it when Shinji learns it, more or less. Though, as we'll talk about, the final film frees itself from the limited Shinji-only point of view that we have in this 3.0 movie. So Shinji, taken by Rei, is now taken to NERV headquarters where he meets Gendo, is now wearing a strange conspicuous visor. And everything around NERV is just like super dark and weird. It's like the whole, that's another thing to talk about here, is because obviously you have the end of Evangelion as a film that really introduced this cosmic horror thing that, 1.0 and 2.0 don't really get into for obvious reasons, because the original series didn't really have that at this point, with little exception. 3.0 takes what was in End of Eva to some extent and just like makes it palpable in a whole new way. It's not the same glorious magic of set piece like, whoa, it's just more like it's just there. It's like they're on a blood-stained world with weird cross-like shapes and fixtures everywhere, and NERV is like this bombed out, hollow, destroyed thing with a lot of like weird technology that's foreign and creepy, like the like weird birthing tank that Unit 13 eventually comes out of, right? But the one bright spot is in the middle of this clearing, you have a tree of life and a piano and this magical gay space angel named Kaworu Nagisa playing keys. And Shinji's immediately like, if I have to be around anyone, let me be around that guy. So he's brought to NERV, and then he forms this bond with Kaworu, and that helps him start to get over a little bit of his depression and confusion. Though, of course, Kaworu is also the one who shows him that it was him that caused all this. And this is why everyone's mad at him. So that's a very shocking scene. And then Shinji has a meeting with Fuyutsuki where he learns about his mother and how she was inserted into Eva 1, and also that Rei is just a clone of his mother. So he gets that information that he gets in episode 23 of the original series in 3.0, which brings me back to another point. 3.0 structurally, if you look at what the rebuilds are doing, 1.0 is the first 6 episodes, like I said, faithfully. 2.0 covers the episodes after that up until episode 19 with a lot of omissions and other changes. And then 3.0 is really just meant to be episode 24 with elements of 21, 22, 23, etc. in there, little touches. Like, for example, like Shinji learning the truth about Rei. Right? So you have all that. And that's just, again, meant to bring us to what the fourth film is, which is a remake of episodes 25 and 26 / the end of Evangelion, right? Makes sense. Kaworu, instead of Shinji, fighting or killing Kaworu, it's now Shinji teams up with Kaworu to pilot Unit 13. He thinks he's going to pull these spears out, and then the spears will allow him to redo the world. Because that's what Kaworu tells him, though there's no real evidence of this. And when they get down there, Kaworu realizes that what Kaworu knows and doesn't know, and why he's led to believe certain things, or why he's even worth Gendo at all, is something that even this last film doesn't exactly clarify, and it's somewhat confusing. But Kaworu feels like, oh shit, I've been tricked. This is all part of Gendo's plan. And Shinji, don't pull out the spears. But Shinji's so desperate, so clinging to this idea that just not dissimilar to what happened in 2.0, where he's like, I need Rei. I'm abandoned all reason. Shinji abandons all reason again to be like, no, I can save the whole world. I can undo what I did. And then everyone will be friends with me again, and everything will go back to normal. Hence the title, You Cannot Redo, because it doesn't work. Kaworu warns him that's not going to work. He initiates it anyway. And that leads to Kaworu eventually having to sacrifice himself. Kaworu already took the Joker from him. And now Shinji lost the only person who was nice to him and helping him. So, okay, now let's discuss the end of 3.0. Shinji loses Kaworu, watches him die, watches the DSS choker sever his head straight up. The near fourth impact, and by the way, that fourth impact and the naming of it, and whether what happened in 3.0 is the fourth impact, the near fourth impact, something else, it's It's referred to as a fourth impact in the context of 3.0, but then 3.0 plus 1.0 starts calling the later events of that film the fourth impact at different points. It's very confusing. But for my clarity's sake, I'm going to call what happens at the end of 3.0 near fourth impact. But yeah, after that event, Shinji, his entry plug is ejected from Unit 13, and he's found by Asuka, whose own entry plug was released and set off. Only Mari escaped in her Ava, and also present is Rei Q, who also was ejected from Ava 9, which was taken over by an angel. And as a result of this, you now have, for the first time in all 3.0, and the first time, honestly, in all of Rebuild, because even in 2.0, you didn't really get much from it other than that one fight in the middle of 2.0. The original is hard to say, but the dominant three children, first, second, and third children, Rei, Shinji, and Asuka, all together, and they're on the red landscape, and Asuka's like, oh, you have to move somewhere closer for the Lilin to find us. And notably, and we'll get back to this and why in the context of the final film, but Asuka refers to human beings now almost exclusively as Lilin, which is a term that in the original series came from Kaworu, but it seems it's been adopted to some extent in the post near third impact, at least by people such as Asuka, and why Asuka would make that notation. Well, like I said, we'll get to. But yeah, they have to wander away from these ruins, presumably not far outside Tokyo 3 or in what was Tokyo 3. And that's where the final movie begins, because we have our Mari opening, but after that it moves to this beautiful opening sequence, one of my favorites, with the Therma Principle, the Shirasagisu track, and we're going to talk a lot about Shirasagisu's incredible soundtrack for sure here. But really, this ending note of 3.0, which is so beautiful, it was actually the biggest reason why I loved 3.0, was just the way it ended. It was like you felt the purpose. Like, this movie was difficult. It was challenging to watch. Certainly the first time you see it, it throws a lot at you. It's dark and depressing. Technically that's normal for Ava, but I think this film in particular felt strange because it was in the context of Rebuild, and it was all alien and new. It wasn't the previous versions of these things. And it gets there, and Shinji's already kind of catatonic, refusing to talk to Asuka and stuff. But Asuka takes him by the hand and starts dragging him, and you get that sensation again of old Asuka and old Shinji, but like renewed in some way. And then you have Rei, and she picks up the digital videotape player, or the S-Dot, the digital audio tape player, which is something that goes all the way back to the original series, of course. It's in Rebuild, and boy, do we get that paid off in the end of the final film. And it's especially fitting because it's really been a through line, especially in Rebuild. Like, it was always present in the original series, but in Rebuild, they clearly made it a story point. And I think the way Anno carried that forward and paid it off is brilliant. But yeah, you have them walking away, Rei holding that player, keeping it after Shinji just drops it, right? And it's just that sensation with Sakura Nagishi, the Hikaru Utada song that plays at the end of 3.0, as opposed to another mix of Beautiful World like 2.0 was. Beautiful World is, of course, the theme song from 1.0. That's kind of the overarching Rebuild theme. In this final film, we get a special version of Beautiful World that plays after the main theme of One Last Kiss in the end credits. But Sakura Nagishi, like, that track, the mournful tone, is just perfect for this tragedy of Shinji and Kaworu, but also like points to the idea that like maybe there is hope beyond this red wasteland. And that is what the final film is exploring. What if there really is hope beyond that red wasteland? What does it look like? How does it feel? What impact will it have on Shinji? No pun intended with the impact. But I think this is now, in order to set the stage even more for this final film, we have to talk about Anno and Anno's state of mind, because it's pretty well documented that the reason it took so long, and remember, it took so long. We're talking, this film came out in 2012. we're only getting this final film in 2021. Like even in Japan, it did not release till March 2021 after some COVID related delays, of course, but still, they were working on the film as late as end of 2020. And the reality of that situation is that Anno just was like kind of fucking done after 3.0. Like 3.0 took a lot out of him, and you have to wonder, well, did it take a lot out of him because he wanted it to? Like, again, the direction of it is this dark, depressing thing, and something that like really kind of challenges Eva. It almost like fans kind of felt like it was another troll job by him to some extent, which I don't think is fair in some ways, but it's really important to just think about the whole scope of Rebuild as a whole, right? So 1.0 and Rebuild as a whole kind of originally came out of like, oh, well, it's been a few years. We have new technologies. You can do this. I'm trying to get my own studio started. Ava is such a popular property. There's a lot of money being left on the table to help me build the studio. And it hopefully will eventually, lead to a new ending, because I'm realizing that I can't just tell the story in one film. I think he broke up the episodes of the series and was like, yeah, 4 works. And I think he always had some intentions to be like, oh, each one will change a little bit more. So by the time you get to the end, it's like a very completely different ending. I think that was always part of the thinking. But how he was going to get there, I think he didn't really know. And it changed quite a bit, right? So 2.0, we already know he was feeling more pressure to make changes, which is why you introduced Mari. And he said, I introduced Mari to force myself to kind of make differences, right? The other change, you have the ending change, which I think was like, yes, what if impact happens earlier? And I think he was always going to carry through with that to some extent, but they gave himself kind of an out with the Kaworu thing. And I think he had some ideas for stories that would become the backstory of that 14 years later. But I do think that the preview at the end of 2.0 for what 3.0 was, which none of it we ended up seeing in 3.0. I do think to some extent that was just placeholder bullshit always, just like kind of the end of the 3.0 trailer is kind of placeholder bullshit. Only really the 2.0 one, the 1.0 trailer for 2.0 was like kind of accurate. And I think that was just more a coincidence of timing. Like they already had a fair bit of work done on it. And I'm talking in the 0.111 and 0.222, 0.333 versions. I have no idea if there's any differences with other versions. But yeah, so I think when it came time to make 3.0, it was like, all right, now you really have to do something different. I think one of the first thoughts probably was like, no. Near third pact really happened. Let's not undo it. Let's maybe take some of those ideas we were throwing around and say that happened, but what if we skipped ahead? And I think this skipping ahead idea is really important to understanding not only 3.0, but this last film, because the last film ends in this future timeline. It's all about this idea of part of the problem that I think Anno was having with Ava and even the Ava rebuilds is like, am I just doing it all over again? Am I really just like, because part of his I think issue with the original Ava and end of Ava was like this relationship with anime and this relationship with the fans. It was like, am I enabling this escapism that I'm attempting to challenge? Because his whole critique of himself and critique of Shinji, and certainly the whole thing, critique might be the wrong word. It's just like escapism. We have to be anti-escapism, and yet Ava has this merch printing empire, as this moe machine for Rei, Ayanami, and Asuka, and all these different things. These girls that just print merchandise and money. It's like this fantasy. Get your body pillows. Just, you don't need to really engage with the world. You can just hug your Rei or Asuka body pillow and become a shut-in and be an incel and all these things. And this deeply concerned Anno, not the least because of his own struggles and depressions that he's going through, right? So I think he was like, the problem with Ava is that it won't grow up. So I'm not going to just undo the designs and make all the pilots old, but I'm going to draw attention to the fact that I kind of can't do that by advancing the world 14 years, just like the real world. Like, it's been about 14 years at this point since the original Evangelion and its ending, right? I'm going to jump it ahead and then deal with the fact that the character stuck, and Shinji is this audience avatar who doesn't understand that he's been living a delusion. I think this pairs, whether originally planned to or not, nicely with the end of 2.0, which is Shinji at his most like, no, I'm just an anime hero boy. I'm going to save Rei, and like, just, no, I can do it. I'll save Rei. It's like, It's like, no, fuck you, fuck that. You're going to be punished for the fact that you think everything can be escaped. And even the story of 3.0 and its tragedy is that Shinji still is still stuck. He still thinks I can just redo it. I can undo it. I can go back to the way things used to be. I can just boom, snap my fingers or grab these spears and it'll change everything. And it's so funny. He's building this relationship with Kaworu, but Kaworu often makes the comment about how Shinji is like this Arrested Development character when they're like staring up at the stars. I think he's like, I forget the exact line. He's like, oh, I like the stars because they never change. And Kaworu's like, Shinji, you're an idiot. Like, he doesn't say it like that, but it's like, because Kaworu, the truth is, loves that about Shinji. There's a nice little reference to that in the final film. Kaworu loves the patheticness of Shinji, is the truth, but it's pathetic nonetheless, and it's not healthy. So Shinji doesn't change or grow. In fact, he gets worse through 3.0. He just, his desperations just lead him to double down into his worst sort of like, no, I have the power to save everything and I should just do that. And I can just close my eyes and run away. Like, again, run away and save everybody sounds like two opposite things, but Shinji's found a way to make them one thing. And that's one of the things that's kind of different about Rebuild Shinji while still the same. And where he ends up in this final film really finally challenges that, right? So Anno's is feeling depressed and whatnot, and he can't get back into it. So it's curious, like what eventually gets him back? Well, one, I think just the baseline, hey, I promised this to fans. I don't want to disappoint people. I took time to make Shin Godzilla in 2016. That's done now. Like, I don't really have an excuse anymore. I kind of need to finish this or just admit that I'm never going to, right? It's do or die. There's an NHK Japanese television documentary that covers Anno and the making of the film. And you get a lot of insight into some of this stuff and some of that feeling from Anno in this process. But Anno, at some point along the way, I think found his mojo back and found something that was really speaking to him about this movie, about what he was trying to say. And that's how you get the brilliance of 3.0 plus 1.0, which now finally we can really dive into. So the big surprise, and this was really a surprise when the film came out in Japan, because they were relatively careful to keep all this stuff out of marketing. They try to replicate that in the international release, but of course they couldn't because all the Japanese stuff had already come out. But yeah, dude, where they are picked up by adult Kensuke and adult Toji. They're alive. I mean, really, you go back to 3.0, like, not only are they not in that movie, but Shinji discovers that his uniform is Toji's old uniform, and it's he's very disturbed by it, and the fact that you don't see or hear anything, and the way everyone's acting at Wheelay, it really leads you to believe that, oh no, everyone's dead. It's been a long time, and everyone's dead, and that's that, Toji's sister Sakura is introduced as a teenager, and she doesn't mention her brother still being alive or anything like that. So I mean, I don't know if Anno originally thought they were dead and changed his mind, but the point is, no, there is something over on the other side of the red waste, and this is what's going to unlock not only the whole plot of 3.0 plus 1.0, but that whole sort of yin and yang of like 3.0 plus 1.0 answering the questions of 3.0 in such a way that almost makes you wonder, like, it's both genius. If it's a retcon, it's genius. If it was planned, it's also a kind of genius. It doesn't really matter either way. It's like a total paradigm shift from expectation, presumably, right? And a necessary one, and one that really makes an impact because your POV is aligned with Shinji. Shinji doesn't know about these things either. So it's like, but of course, this is where 3.0 and 1.0 is different, is where our POV is no longer really that aligned with Shinji. And we're very excited to see Kensuke and Toji and Ikari and all that, and to see, Rei Q, Miss Ayanami, or Miss Lookalike, I should say. We'll call her Miss Lookalike now, since that's what she's called in this film. What Miss Lookalike are discovering about this Village 3 that exists, in the countryside outside Tokyo 3, presumably, and is, this train-addled depot, right? What they're discovering, we're excited by it as an audience, but Shinji is still catatonic. He's in end of Evangelion mode, which again brings about this idea that structurally this film is our end of Evangelion replacement, right? This is taking over the same space. So Kaworu dies at the end of episode 24. Kaworu dies at the end of episode 3.0 or Q, and that leaves Shinji in this just just total dejected state. The difference is in Eva, he's also has this Asuka in a coma, and here Asuka is just present, but just not fucking feeling Shinji. But yeah, so we're we quickly get out of that point of view, and we get to follow Miss Lookalike as she learns about the village and just learns about human life in general. And this is her example of human life. So a lot of people have compared this part of the film, and I was anticipating this, to Studio Ghibli and to the work of Miyazaki's. Like, is this first 40 minutes of the film that are just really the stuff in the village is like his homage to Miyazaki's work to some extent. And I get down with that interpretation. I mean, I really kind of see it that way as well. And it's beautiful for it. And this really just shows you what Kara is capable of as a studio. They are operating at a Ghibli level in a large way. But it's more than just like, parroting Ghibli or parroting Miyazaki and borrowing its aesthetics. It's making a point, in a very Miyazaki-like point, that sets the theme and like how this story is going to be told and how we going to get to the place we get to, which is this focus on humanism and what humanity can really kind of be. And I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind. Watching Rei Lookalike really learn. And it's portrayed in this very simple matter where Hikari, she's asking Hikari questions like, why do we say goodbye? Why do we say goodnight? Why do we hold hands? And Hikari gives these very actually well-packed answers. You might say it's a little unrealistic, but just explaining the basics of human connection and human interaction. But it's not just that. It's also watching Rei learn through experience or interacting with other characters like the women she works with, which is, again, a very Miyazaki perspective where you have a group of women working, bonding over work, bonding over solidarity as work and the values of being outside in nature. And then you have the little girl as well, who's just very simple gestures of kindness. And it's like, here's a reward for working hard today. You dropped this and I'm returning it to you. These little tiny gestures. It seems like a world away from Evangelion as we've known it. I mean, that's what's really striking about this is the paradigm shift from everything we've ever seen in NGE, the TV series, everything we've ever seen in End of Eva, everything we've ever seen in the rebuilds up until this point, especially 3.0. 3.0 is a movie that was intentionally kind of devoid of humanity. The only humanity you got was the relationship between Kaworu and Shinji, which this final film almost is a little bit of a challenge to, or a vision to, though if you were paying attention to some of the key ideas in 3.0 about that relationship, it's not coming out of left field at all. There's something not right about it for all the good things about it. But here, we're actually being given a true look at humanity. And the beauty of what Kara can do as a studio is being put to the test, but also the storytelling of Anno. I think this is Anno saying, no, I think I'm more interested in what my master Miyazaki does, or the types of stories that my wife, Anno's wife, the manga artist, forgetting her name, but Anno talks a little bit about this. I'm gonna get a little bit more into it though later. I don't want to get too deep into that idea because it becomes really relevant when we talk about the ending of this film. But just the general idea of like, yes, I need to show humanity. And the process to which Rei learns about humanity, the process to which Shinji starts to relearn about it through his experiences working with Kensuke and Toji and also interacting with Rei, it's kind of what really brings things together, which, speaking of Toji and Kensuke and Ikari, the revelation that these people are alive and that they're not only alive, but they're back in this movie and they're driving the whole first act is something truly special. And I think it, again, shows the way this movie is maybe most in touch with its roots in NGE rather than Rebuild, because the truth is Rebuild has had very little room for Kensuke, Toji, and Hikari, especially Hikari. And we're getting in touch with this character because there's that great moment. I think it's Eva or NG episode 4 Yeah, the one where Shinji runs away for the first time after the events of episode 3. Yeah, where Kensuke and Toji first enter the story and they almost die and he saves them, and then he struggles with the Ava's about to run out of power, kills that angel, I forget their names. But that's in that event is recreated in Rebuild 1.0, but what isn't in Rebuild 1.0, but other than a few stray shots, they're kind of repurposed in the overall narrative trajectory to kind of tie it in with the Ramiel episodes 5 and 6 thing, is that Shinji, when he runs away in the series, runs into Kensuke. And it's really your first insight into Kensuke. And we don't get a lot after that, because after that, Kensuke is almost used as like almost a joke where he's like, I'm so desperate to be an Ava pilot. Please, Masato, make me an Ava pilot. Please make me an Ava pilot. But Kensuke has a depth to him. I mean, like the other children in Shinji's class, he doesn't have a mother. He's raised alone by his father. And he has this intense interest in military, which is a little unusual, but you realize that it's coming more from this survivalist perspective, which is what really kind of is highlighted in this final film. It's like Kensuke, because of the difficulties of his life, is like, I need to be self-sufficient. And it's a beautiful thing to learn that Kensuke's growing up, and what happened in those 14 years after Near Third Impact was him putting that stuff to use and helping Toji, helping Ikari, helping all the other villagers. And I mean, Toji's such a different person than he was as a teenager. And that's cool to see that transformation. Who would have thought Toji would become a doctor of all things? But Kensuke, he's certainly way more grown up and mature and sophisticated, but the core of him is much more one direct. Like, obviously he was a survivalist geek then, now he's an actual survivalist. But it's so fundamental to understand that, like, yeah, it was Kensuke who got everybody safe. It was Kensuke who knew what to do. And that's a truly beautiful thing. And I think Shinji recognizes that. Like, you know, and Kensuke wants him to recognize it. Kensuke is like, Shinji, I'm your friend. You know me. You know me. That's what he's saying. You know me. You remember me back then. Like if I could be who I am today, if Toji could be who he is today, then there's hope for everybody. It's a really powerful thing. And that's what the first act is so good about. It's like everything that happens later, all the madness, all the lore, all the revelations and ending, you know, you can't shortcut it. You have to actually go through the motions of understanding. And I like that this movie shows, not tells. I think that's caused some frustration I've seen online about, like, why is Shinji so different? Like, dude, pay attention to what's happening. Think about things in a larger perspective. Don't just get bogged down in, I need everything told to me. Ava's supposed to be this one way. I didn't ask for this, blah, 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 blah. No. Sit back, relax, let the movie speak to you. Seriously, open your ears and eyes and mind. Let the movie speak to you. Think about it, consider it. This is a meditative film, especially this first act. It's meditative. I know the loud bombast of the second act might make you think otherwise, but it's meditative and it's intentional. Now, obviously, Shinji, his road to getting out of his depression has to start with him in this lowest of the low. Now, he didn't literally masturbate at any point. The depression takes on a different shape, but he's catatonic. When he sees Asuka, because of the DSS choker, he immediately projectile vomits. I mean, this guy is in some deep, deep shit here. And it's notable the way Asuka reacts to this depression, because she's already been living with her reality for so long. Shinji's still new to this. You have to remember, it's like been a few days really since he's been reawakened at this point, at the start of Act 1. Obviously, a lot of time passes in Act 1, but the events of 3.0, presumably it happened over the course of like 4 or 5 days, maybe a little more. A week and a half, 2 weeks at most. Like, he's at Nerve for a couple days. Like, he's enough to get to know Kaworu and learn to be better at the piano, but not much else. Maybe a month or two. I don't know. Not either way. It's not been that long. And I mean, one of the ways Asuka points this out to him is when she does, have that moment with him, which I'm going to get to in a second. She mentions, your body's going to start changing, just like hers already has. Changing as in change to be unchangeable. The curse, the Ava, the way apparently it works from what we see in this film is that you hit a certain point in your puberty where you just lock in.
And when you lock in, it's not just like, oh, I don't grow up. It's also that you stop eating. Like, that's the thing. She's trying to force feed Shinji, but Shinji's not going to need to eat anymore soon if the curse of Eva persists for him the way it has for her, the way it has for presumably Mari. She's not going to need to. Asuka says later the only thing that grows about her is her hair. So she needs a haircut. But yeah, let's talk about that moment, or talk about the moment before it. When Shinji arrives at Kensuke's, Asuka's there naked. And she's like, why are you just looking at me stupid, you know? But yeah, let's talk about Asuka and Kensuke, because this is causing a lot of controversy online. And I got to say, this was something I was spoiled on ahead of time. And when I first heard it, I was like, what the fuck? No way. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, I try not to be too reactionary because I'm like, I want to understand it in context. But even before I saw the movie, the more I thought about it, the more I was like thinking about it. I was like, I'm sure there's something there. I mean, I was also spoiled on Shinji Mari, so I had that context too about like, oh right, yeah, Shinji ends up with Mari, so Asuka having another. That I think that's what it was that made me okay with it. I was like, well, if Shinji and Asuka are going to be together, Asuka deserves something, right? Kensuke, okay, and I had seen a peep of his adult design, so I was like, oh, okay, he's kind of has a little bit of a glow up here, but it wasn't as dramatic as I ended up seeing it later. Because once you see the film and you see just how, I mean, Frank, excuse me for saying it, how Chad-like Kensuke really is, like how he's the fucking basically the leader, the most important person. I mean, he's also a Sigma. He's really Sigma. not to get too needy. He's very Sigma. He lives on the top of the mountain alone. He kind of does his work by himself. He's up at 6 a.m. on his grind set every morning. Oh, I should loop in the grind set music right now. The Kensuke grind set. Fucking be unfazed by naked. Oh God, there's a lot of problematic stuff about that, which actually now maybe I should get into. So what's kind of being implied in this movie that I think is really fascinating and makes a lot of sense in the context of the lore, whether you think it's like, quote, okay in the real world or not, is something I'll have to leave to you, or I may try to weigh in on a little bit. You know, Shinji or Kensuke and Asuka presumably maybe started to get together in some fashion, like almost as soon as, you know, not long after near third impact, because it probably would have been like, oh, hey, you're here. I'm here. I'm trying to help people survive. You're an Ava pilot. You can protect us, but I'm already doing a lot of the work here. And there is no Shinji. He's gone. You might still be hung up on Shinji or whatever, but that's all in the past now. I'm kind of growing up and asserting myself. And it's like, okay, Asuka's so lonely, and as we see in her final ending instrumentality stuff, like she just needed somebody to pat her on the head, like literally verbatim said in the movie. And Kensuke was there. Kensuke was there to look out after her. And it probably got to a point where they started to get more romantic, but around that same time, Kensuke kept getting older, and she kept like getting older mentally, but not physically. And that probably made Kensuke feel like, yeah, this isn't Kensuke being a super moral kind of guy, I guess. It's like, yeah, that isn't right. That isn't right. We can't do that. But they never separated, actually. They still, when Asuka doesn't really live with Kensuke because she's mostly with Wile, but when she does her visits to the village, she stays with him. And there's this total comfort and familiarity. That's what's communicated about the whole situation with the nakedness, is that Kensuke is totally comfortable with her and she's totally comfortable with him. And it's kind of a cute thing. And obviously the fact that, you know, what happens in the end, Asuka growing up and seemingly going back to Kensuke, yeah, they're going to be in business together for a while, I guess. But yeah, getting back to the other aspect that I alluded to with Miyazaki and the Miyazaki influence and the Rei's sort of Rei lookalikes kind of journey with the workers and the women. It kind of reminds me of the stuff in Irontown and with Princess Mononoke, you know, which is a very cool vibe. Like there's that kind of same energy, I would say. But really everything that's happening to Rei, it's beautiful in its own right, and the way it's rendered with the music and everything. But it's ultimately to serve the Shinji story, because once Rei gets to a certain point, she wants to reach out to Shinji. Now there's an interesting moment with Rei and Asuka, where Rei goes to Asuka looking for Shinji, and Shinji's still in this depressive mode. So this is after. Well, I guess I have to talk about that scene to track the Shinji depression stuff. So Shinji at first is literally just like refusing to move anywhere. He gets brought by Kensuke to his place, but he just wants to sit in the corner and literally not eat, basically starve himself to death, be on hunger strike, depression hunger strike. And Asuka's not having it. So she starts to force feed him. It's one of this incredibly animated thing where you can tell they're using motion capture and CG and that camera movement, but like also overlaying 2D animation on top of it. It's like that perfect blend that Kara is just like kind of perfected, but we've never really seen a shot or a moment like this. And it's used for it's not used for a big action set piece. It's used for a visceral, emotional, fucking cathartic butting of heads where Asuka and Shinji finally fucking come to it. And Asuka like shows the tough love. She's like, listen, fucking asshole. It's like you can't do this. Like, I'm not going to let you just starve yourself. You think you're the only one with fucking problems. That's your problem. You're so myopic. You don't see it. Like, you have no idea. You think like it's only going to get worse from here. Let me tell you, because now you're going to be living in the world that I live in and deal with the shit I do, the curse of the Ava. You're not going to grow. So you better eat before you can stop having to eat at all. And she just is like fed up with him. But again, it's coming from that place of love is the thing you got to understand. I think it awakens Shinji enough to like get up and get out of there. But again, obviously still in the throes of it. He hasn't even spoken yet. That's it. It takes like 40 minutes before Shinji speaks in this movie, which is impressive. But yeah, so he starts going to the thing, which means when Rei decides I want to go look for him, she goes to Kensuke's and he's not there. So she's left to confront Asuka, who at first thinks she might be a hostile invader from Nerve or something, and grabs her gun. Asuka, who's committed to her partial nudity, just Willie wears the jacket and her panties. That's it. Make of it what you will. Guess it's just her sort of comfort or whatever. So Asuka points out, and this is like actual lore that retroactively explains something in 2.0 that was obviously at the time rubbed me the wrong way, which is what is this lovey-dovey buddy-buddy stuff between Rei and Shinji? Well, because it's obviously not how it was in the original series. Like Ray's growth in NGE was like, I come to care for Shinji, but not in like this, not in a motherly way, not in a loverly way, not in a sisterly way, just like in a sort of like she says the Ava piloting the Asian back in episode 5 or whatever, or 6, she says, piloting the Ava is my connection to humanity. And instead that grows over the course of Rei 2's existence in NG comes to Shinji, so that when Rei 3 becomes a thing, having Rei 2's memories to an extent imprints on Shinji instead of imprinting on Gendo, which causes her to make the decision she makes in End of Evangelion to reject Gendo's instrumentality and instead make Shinji the center of instrumentality. But again, it's never a romantic thing. In Evangelion 2.0, there's this thing where it's like, oh, her and Asuka both like Shinji and whatever. And Asuka points out, though it's unclear if she's really talking about herself. I mean, she specifies the Ayanami series, so it seems to suggest she's not. That therefore, her, quote, crush on Shinji is more genuine, I guess. But yeah, she says, no, the Ayanamis, and we know this matches with what Gendo and Futsuki are saying behind the scenes about, oh, bring in Rei, like we're going to use Rei as part of our plan. Well, it turns out they sort of program the Ayanami series, condition them before they're even born to fall in love with Shinji. So it's not just like some random thing. It's part of the plot, but it's actually baked into the cake. So Rei lookalike is just predestined to just have a crush on Shinji, even though she's a clone of his mother. So it's creepy. But whatever. I think in this movie, it's kind of cute in just the sense that Rei lookalike is really becoming her own person. So it's much easier to accept that, like, she might, quote, look like his mother and might genetically have a lot in common with his mother, but it's not his mother. She's her own human being. But yeah, so she's like, I love her response when Asuka tells her this, because she goes, doesn't matter. I'm okay with the way I feel. She's taking agency over something that she doesn't have control of, which is very philosophically, to my mind, relevant to my own thoughts about free will and determinism and things like that, which is, I won't get into it, but safe to say, I think that's the best humans can really do. It's just accept the fact that they don't really have control over things. And that is the best form of control we can aspire to, I guess. So I really like that response for her. But then as Rei starts to connect with Shinji, and she's the one consequentially gets him to start eating, and Shinji starts to open up, he starts to work more with Kensuke and Toji. The relationship that starts to bond between Shinji and Kensuke is really eye-opening for Shinji. And it starts to seed in another important theme that certainly leads to our ending, which is the idea of fathers and mothers. Evangelion has been so focused on mothers, but the father is almost defined by its absence, or it's depending on how you look at its presence, because Gendo is the one who's present in the story, whereas Yui's not. But Gendo's whole presence is to be absent, is to be distant, is to be alienating from Shinji, be this monkey on his back. And in the original NGE and end of Evangelion, they never come together. I mean, they kind of, you can look at it a bunch of different ways. Some people would say, no, there's no reason for them to, because what Shinji needs to get over and accept in the context of the original series and end of Eva is that he doesn't need his father. It's not going to get help from there. And so he should stop being desperate for it. He needs to accept his own condition and blah, blah, blah. So I get, but this film outright rejects that idea. Okay. And I think for good reason. You know, there's the really amazing scene where Kensuke brings Shinji and Asuka to his father's grave, and he explains, no, my father survived the near third impact, but he just died the way a lot of people do, just in a random accident. No rhyme or reason. And it's a tough pill I have to swallow every day, that for all my survivalist skills that kept us safe, I couldn't keep him safe from a very simple thing. And now he's gone. And I have regrets about it, because I wish I did more to speak to him. I maybe it does not explicitly explain, but maybe he's a little too focused on his Asuka crush or being a help to the village. Either way, he feels like there was things left unsaid between him and his father. Can only imagine how Hideaki Anno feels, because if you know some of the backstory between Hideaki Anno and his father and how that might inform the way Gendo is written, it's a very tough thing. And I specifically, I'm referring to the fact that Anno's father suffered an accident that didn't kill him. It left him a amputee. And there's a lot of bitterness and resentment that came from that amputee status that his father had, that alienated young Hideaki from his father and his mother as well, because it's not, I don't want to prescribe anything I don't know, but it seems like there might have been some abuse and violence there and retaliation, and who knows what else. I don't know. I don't want to cast aspersions, but that seems to be some of the implication when people point to this. The accident aspect of it, I think, might come into that. But either way, Kensuke lost his father to the accident, and he still feels like there's regrets on the table. And so when he tells Shinji, he's like, listen, man, it's never too late. Your father's still alive. Talk to him. And Asuka says what all the audience is thinking, like, this is Gendo. Right? Like, Gendo's a homicidal, genocidal, a death cult freak who's like not even really human at this point. I mean, we're going to see exactly to that extent. Like, there's just, and Shinji's Shinji. Like, Shinji can't fucking talk, never been able to talk to his dad. He is, I mean, he's at this stage of the movie, he's clearly gotten better, but he's still a depressed, confused kind of person who's not taking that much agency for himself. So the idea that you're going to say, hey, talk to Gendo, but oh boy, do we get it paid off, man. So the last kind of big thing, or sorry, before I get to that, we also have to talk about Kaji Jr. So yeah, Kensuke takes Shinji to meet Kaji Jr. And it's not explicitly stated, but it seems he's doing this intentionally, because Kensuke is clearly very emotionally intelligent. I mean, demonstrates that throughout this arc. He is trying to help Shinji and give Shinji the space he needs and all this stuff. He's very emotionally intelligent, which is why, again, I support the Kensuke Asuka thing, because I assume that deep emotional intelligence and empathy that Kensuke expresses to Shinji is what he expressed to Asuka, where he kind of practiced and learned that. And that's a very beautiful and human thing. But yeah, he takes Shinji to meet Kaji Jr. and reveals Kaji Jr.'s existence. And, when on the ride home, he's explaining to Shinji, it's like, Misato doesn't know him. A lot's being implied there with that, by the way. But it's okay. It's like it's her decision. Like, the truth is, she's not mad at you, dude. She's not, as in Shinji. She's afraid, and afraid for good reason, afraid for herself, afraid for you, because she feels like she failed you. Like she's been like, you've been gone for 14 years. So it wasn't like people were blaming you who were not there. They were, from Masato's perspective, and from her internal, she was blaming herself that she couldn't do more, blaming herself that Kaji, the Kaji senior, had to sacrifice himself, like all these different things. And it's been a long time. So it's not like this constant internal attack on herself. She's gotten over it. But the way she's gotten over it is she's steeled herself to people. But Shinji, don't let that stealing confuse you and make you think Masato doesn't care about you. The truth is, as I made a joke, I'm speaking from Kensuke's perspective, I made a joke earlier about, hey, some quote good things came out of the near third impact, like Ikari and Toji getting together. Left unsaid, but maybe me and Asuka getting together. Well, there's more than even that. I think that for Masato, it was something where she could finally start to understand that, like, as difficult as it is, she already was a mother, and it was to you, Shinji, and she cares about you, and she wants you to live, and she's happy that you're here, but she can't let herself get hurt again. She can't let herself get distracted from the mission to protect everybody, because being a mother to her son might be not being a mother to her. It might be being a hero to the world. Now, personally, I'm speaking now as myself. Personally, I don't think there's any excuse to, not let your son know you if you're a mother or whatever, if there any way you can. But I also totally understand Masato's perspective, and I think it's brave and interesting that the film depicts that. But yeah, now getting to the whole Rei's death and twist thing. Yeah, the movie, Anno boldly kills off Rei lookalike in the end of the first act. So Rei is more or less absent for the rest of the movie. We actually get the original Rei later, in very brief little bits. But this movie's it gets all its Rei shit out of the way. Like, it has a death that means something here. Rei lookalike, for all her growth, truth is she needs the LCL treatment. She can only get at nerve, or else her body will just, her AT field will collapse essentially. So she knows it's coming, and she decides to use her last moments to try to reach out to Shinji and say, hey, will you give me a name? And also take your tape player back. I held on to it for you. And I know you try to give it to the original writer. Well, she doesn't know that, but we know that, the audience. But it wasn't for you to give to Rei Ayanami. You know who it's for. The person who it came from. And again, all that's left unsaid, but it's implied, and that's the thing. You got to pay attention. So Rei disintegrates into LCL, and Shinji does break down. It hurts him. It fucking hurts him. But at this point, he's grown. He's learned to accept. And look, the whole point of the first act is that Shinji was shown the kindness and empathy, mainly from Kensuke and Rei lookalike, that he was missing, that he had been missing throughout the rebuilds. Because like I said, even the love and empathy and kindness he was shown by Kaworu, there's something a little wrong about it. Not the gay stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. There's something a little wrong about it. So in other words, he hadn't gotten that ever before. He was missing it, that true, genuine kindness and empathy. And what the growth that Rei lookalike experienced by connecting with the true and genuine humanity, community, nature, purpose, it rubs off on Shinji. And seeing her growth woke him up to the truth that he'd been denying his whole life, that people can grow, that people can change. And then Kensuke shows him that there's a world bigger than him. Not only is Shinji not the cause of everyone's pain, but his continued existence is a consolation for it, mainly to Masato, right? Like, the fact that Shinji still exists is the reason I can keep going. And by working with Kensuke, learning to fish, Shinji understands how to achieve purpose in himself. And then he also has Asuka. Asuka being Asuka, she shows him that tough love and attacks him. But it's, again, he understands by that demonstration that tough love is just that. It's love. She cares about him. She cares about what happens to him. She does not want him to wallow up and die. And all these things make Shinji realize that he can grow up, that he can change, that he doesn't have to be stuck. Being depressed, and I know from experience, is about being stuck. Once you recognize that you don't have to be stuck, you recognize that you no longer are depressed. And it's not just something that happens in one go. It's something that happens very gradually. And I think that Act 1 takes the time. It's been several, like at least 2 or 3 weeks seem to pass, if not more. So Shinji's given that. And then he also is reminded by Kensuke that his relationship with Gendo, which is the true cause of all the madness, the true inciting incident to everything in both timelines, right? It's not something that can't be fixed. He can do something about it. Gendo's still there. He can still do something. So when Rei lookalike dies, rather than make Shinji feel hopeless, because these changes have already taken place, it instead motivates Shinji to want to do his part to save the people of the village from what his father's going to do, because he knows that's coming. He knows that the nerve is not done. He knows that. So when the relay ship returns, it's like, hey, I'm new Shinji. Act 2 and 3 Shinji is new Shinji. I'm not going to brag about it. I'm actually going to keep quiet again for the next like 30, 40 minutes of this film, but I have something on my mind. I'm ready. And Shinji becoming that Shinji, don't let anyone tell you different. It's 100% earned. You have to really wrestle with the meditation as the movie, because it's a show, not tell, but it's earned. And it's a Shinji we've never seen before. So now moving on to Act 2, we get this just really great look at Relay and the Wonder in a different context, because obviously when we see it in 3.0, we're way too weighted into Shinji's perspective and with all the confusion and so forth. And this is also Anno's chance to unpack what's Relay about. Like I said, is this a retcon, or is this always planned in just the POV? It doesn't really matter. The point is we're getting it now. And we're also getting to, because this is the first time we're really seeing Misato in this film directly, we're seeing and understanding Misato prepares, like the weight that kind of weighs on her, the mission of Relay, the mission Kaji left her, the preservation of nature, which again ties it back into Act 1. We also get our reintroduction after the opening into Mari and Asuka and Mari's relationship. They kind of have a very flirty, sexual, sisterly thing going, and they tease each other about Shinji. Like Mari very forwardly is like, don't you want to bone Shinji? And she's like, no, I'm over Shinji, which then leads to the scene where we actually get Asuka saying it to Shinji. She goes, look, man, I used to have a huge crush on you, but I'm over it now. So I just wanted you to know. So yeah, I can satisfy that need to not be pent up with all this weird feeling towards you, that even in the first act, when technically my quote tough love was helping you, I'm still a little shaken by your presence, dude. And it's a beautiful moment, especially again in the context of the original timeline and NGE and all that stuff. Because in 2.0 it's played a lot more straightforwardly, like Asuka had to crash on Shinji. Whereas in the original series, it's a little more subtle. But either way, it's like this recognition. It's a moment for Asuka. It's a moment for Shinji to hear that's obviously paid off later. And yeah, so now we get into the big plot and lore and action of the film of Act 2. And boy, oh boy, does it start off with a fucking banger. The idea that we're going finally at long last to the South Pole for some action. I mean, that was unexpected. I did not know that's where we were. I did not know that's where all the red shit in the trailers and shit was. I had no idea. I knew that was obviously through the gates of Guff or whatever, but I didn't think that was the Antarctic version. So yeah, it's fucking cool to finally fucking go there and have that like really like second impact lore be paid off. And that's the thing. We get the fucking crazy ass fucking paranoia track from Sagisu with the fucking crazy guitars and shit, and the new Ava 2 with the Gatling guns and all the weapons they keep throwing in. It's like the skydiving thing down. It's fucking dope, man. I thought it was gonna be a little overhyped, but it's really fucking great watching all that shit take place. And oh, of course, fucking you realize the Wonder is actually originally a nerve vessel, which means there's 3 other still nerve control antithesis to the Wonder, the anti-Wonders, if you will, that have to be fought. So you get the battleship music to I forget what anime it's from, but another one of these classic old school animes that Anno probably grew up with that he's paying homage to with the music. And yeah, so when they finally get down to it and we finally get Gendo, because Gendo has been pretty absent in this story for a story that revolves around his existence so much. He hasn't made an appearance till halfway through the movie. And yeah, here he is, Gendo Ikari. And, Asuka. Oh, I guess before that, you have Asuka's little thing Because at first she just like the mission is to permanently deactivate, or at least, I guess I don't know if it's permanent, but to prevent Unit 13 from awakening. Because obviously Unit 13 is going to be used as the God mode trigger point for whatever new impact that Gendo is trying to start up here again. And so, Asuka has this deactivation staff, and she's trying to insert it into Unit 13, which is deactivated on its little cross thing, but it's not working. And this is where we get the reveal that the eye patch Asuka has is actually from the angel going back to 2.0, having entered her body, and she's been living with it. So she has one of these fucking suppression pillars literally in her eye. And so when she realizes that there's no way she can get the spirit through without like using the full unrestricted power of her Ava and her piloting, she basically rips that shit out and goes angel mode. And her Ava just like, that's where you get the fucking crazy, this is the whatever Beyond Belief track, the epic shit. Of course, it was all set up. It was all part of Gendo's plan. And then now we can get to Gendo. And I love this fucking scene because we have Misato and Ritsuko. And it's a little bit of like the end of Ava scene with Ritsuko, but now that Misato's there too and shit, and like fucking having Ritsuko shoot him. And of course, you get the underneath the visor and the payoff to the quote key of Nebuchadnezzar, which is that no, Gendo used it to become not human, which he implies is not just so he has magical god powers necessarily, but a bit of that. It's because he wanted to access knowledge, forbidden knowledge of these darker rituals, this like next level human instrumentality that he's going to enact that involves things like Ava Imaginary and all this stuff that like presumably he learned because of this secret knowledge that the key of Nebuchadnezzar gave him, and along with the god powers. So what we have is Ritsuko confronting Gendo, just like the end of Ava, and she's shooting at him, and it's weird. There's this thing where none of that has been developed in the Rebuild franchise really at all. The Ritsuko Gendo relationship is just entirely absent. So this can be seen as an example of the series kind of just relying on a shorthand or a knowledge of the original timeline and the original product to work, essentially, for better and for worse. But because I am intimately familiar with the series and I am intimately familiar with the end of Ava, it works for me, whether it should or not, right? So I'm like, yes, Ritsuko, fucking get it done. She doesn't have the Magi to fuck her up this time. But of course, Gendo has his god power, so it doesn't really go anywhere. Meanwhile, Misato is just like trying to again, like, what the fuck is Gendo's endgame here? And Gendo kind of tells us, and we get this interesting download of the mythology full of big terms and big ideas and really interesting visual representation. We're actually seemingly finally at long last seeing actual pages of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we can see our angels on there, and it's really interesting to kind of see how that plays. Then finally, after Gendo ascends and is like, yes, I'm taking Unit 1 back, and I also have Asuka. So again, Asuka's in danger. Someone's got to save Asuka. He has Asuka, and he has Unit 1. Shinji arrives on the scene and is like, father. And Gendo kind of just turns around and ignores him. But Shinji's not prepared to just be ignored. Gendo escapes off with the stuff, and Shinji is just finally able, at long last. This is very satisfying, having gone through 3.0 and really all of Evangelion up until this point. Shinji's finally able to kind of talk to Misato, except he's interrupted when Sakura and girl with pink hair, useless character, shows up and is like, no, I'm gonna shoot Shinji. We can't let him board an Ava. He's cause of everything, obviously Sakura has some empathy, but the other one is just like, no, never. I've lost total faith in Misato because she clearly is a kiss ass for Shinji. And it feels like unnecessary, but it's important for what it does for Misato's character, because she actually stands up for Shinji. She takes a bullet for him straight out of End of Ava. So again, Misato's bleeding out, taking a bullet for Shinji. the other two finally come down because they realize that Shinji, despite everything they've been taught, is their only hope. He's the only one who can stop Gendo. So they're like, it's a very satisfying moment where Masato's like, bring in the plug suit. And he gets his old school blue and white Unit 1 plug suit again. Here he is, the third children back for us, right? And she talks to Masato, and they finally, like, you know, he tells her, I met Kaji, the young Kaji Jr. And we know Masato already knows this because very touchingly, Masato receives, presumably from Kensuke, receives a photo of Shinji and Kaji, you know, Kaji Jr. together. And it's like her two sons, the son she knows and the son she doesn't know, even though it's her biological son. And that's the thing. Like, it's sad and messed up in some ways, but it's just truthful and honest. Like, Shinji's her son, not Kaji Jr. She doesn't know Kaji Jr. Shinji knows Shinji. Shinji's her son. And she's finally back with her son, and she's looking her son in the eye. She's not worried she's going to die in this context because Sakura is able to shield, and it's like kind of near future medical technology she has at her disposal. But, you know, she's ready to heal, be healed. But she also knows, and this is obviously something that plays out later in the climax, that if someone's going to go down with the ship, it's going to be her. So it's a very still similar vibe to End of Eva, but like, unlike catatonic Shinji, it's the opposite. She finally gets to see Shinji, the new man, the man. And it's like that moment where Masato realizes her son's grown up. Her son's a man now. And it's like that proud mother moment. And it's so beautiful because the Shinji Masato relationship, I love it because it is fucked up. But I also love it because at its core, it's still a wholesome thing, as fucked up as it is. This is a mother and a son, a person who needed a mother and a person who needed a son in some ways. And they've both grown up. It's been 14 years. Shinji missed that 14 years, but he's done a lot of quick growing up in the last couple of weeks or months. And Masato's finally grown up. She's put it behind her. And now it's time. It's fucking time to go. Act 3. Here it is. We're finally here. Shinji is taking charge. After all these goddamn years, Shinji Ikari is here to take charge. And Mari shows up and is like, I'm taking you to Gendo. We're going to send through the doors of Guff to the other side. We're finally seeing the other side of the door, the gates or doors of Guff, which is really cool, into the sort of quantum imaginary zone. The sort of Eva science sci-fi here is, I love it a lot. Like, I love it. Again, it does actually fit together. You think about it, because we talked about quantum ray, the wave particle distinction when it comes to the Evangelions, or sorry, not, well, the Evangelions too, but more so the angels. And here it is. There's the sort of quantum entangled antimatter imaginary number universe on the other side of the door, where everything is possible and nothing is truly there, but everything can be there. It's like this limitless zone. And another really cool nod is when Shinji arrives there, he's just like, he's already God mode in his mind. He's like, no, don't worry, Mari. He can quantum teleport he wants. I know exactly how to get to them. And I think the idea here is he does because he's not trying to trace Gendo. He's chasing Unit 1, and he can sense it. He can sense the Rei Ayanami, rebuild Rei Ayanami, the original rebuild Rei Ayanami, Rei 2, if you will. There. She's there. Her spirit's in Unit 1. I guess someone told him that. I forget who earlier. But he knows that's there, and he just goes right to it, and boom, then you get your fucking, I love this, my favorite music cue. What's it called? Forget, but it's like dun, 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 dun. And it's like it goes with the crazy operatic thing, because Unit 1, and I love that they say this on the Wonder, they're looking at the readings, so like, no, Shinji's sync rate's 0, he can't fight Gendo. It's like, actually his sync rate is the closest thing to 0, infinite. His sync rate is infinite. I mean, if there's any lie that, like, yes, Shinji does get to be anime hero boy with superpowers, it's this moment. Obviously, what follows subverts it in a cool way, but yeah, He's like, I am true alpha sigma whatever fucking dude, bro, and I have infinite sync rate. So what ensues is this Gendo Shinji fight where he's able to generate the Spirit Cassius, generate the lost limbs of Ava Unit 1. So Ava Unit 1 is fully restored, and him and Gendo confront each other. Meanwhile, Misato prepares the Wonder because she knows that like it's going to take a little bit more, that Shinji can't just do it alone, right? We'll get back to that in a second. But once Shinji and Gendo are like fighting, kind of they're floating through, they reach what they call the Golgotha object, which is at the heart of this imaginary universe and takes you to a whole nother like sort of, I guess, existence of like where he says like, this is the realm of the gods. This is where all things come from. Turns out the realms of the gods is the fourth wall breaking universe of imagination, and where the movie goes from here, like this movie's idea of what Human Instrumentality Project is basically, is where Anno really gets to let loose and tie the room together and do things that I'm not sure how to explain. I'm not going to really attempt to some extent, but I was incredibly satisfied by it. I think this was the right creative decision, sense be damned, right? So they ascend into the object and we're immediately thrust in. This was the moment where the first time I watched the film, I just lit up in such deep excitement when it gets that hard cut to he's back in the hospital bed, because I fucking knew, yes, we are entering now a realm where this battle is going to take a very cool shape. And that's what happens. So he fucking wakes the hospital room, then all of a sudden he's back in the Ava cage. Ava Unit 1 descends like it's back in the OG series, and boom, all of a sudden it goes into this weird CG. And we'd seen this in the trailers and people said it looked bad, and it definitely does, except it's on purpose because this is supposed to be like a fucking Ultraman kind of thing where it's like they're on a studio set with fake CG buildings and other matte painting backdrops, and literally Unit 1 crashes into a matte painting, then breaks that fourth wall, and it's all of a sudden in some studio space. And it's still funny that all of a sudden it transplants them, and they're in the classroom, they're in Misato's apartment, and they're like little mini versions of the Ava, the scales all over the place. And you just realize that like all the fabric of quote reality of this world, the metatext, is completely breaking down around them. And from a character perspective, Shinji's realizing that this fight is futile because they keep just clashing the AT fields. And Gendo's like, that's not going to work because our Avas are perfectly synced, which is interesting. It's starting to see this idea that maybe Unit 13 being, quote, Gendo's unit / Kaworu's unit. What's the connection there? But also we know Unit 1, Yui, father, mother, right? We talked about this in the context of Act 1. This is a story of father and mother. Ava's always had the mother, but now we're putting the father in there too. That's what Rebuild's really contributing. Father, mother, father versus mother, right? So yeah, they're like realizing that the only way to solve this is to talk. Around this same time, Gendo unleashes or views Ava Imaginary, the Black Adam, and it becomes giant CG Uncanny Valley version of Rei. And all of a sudden we get all our end of Evangelion imagery set to very different music. And I liked it. I liked the whole weird yellow CG, bad CG on purpose. It's almost like Anno was like, hey, I think the CG should look like if we did End of Ava and CG back in 1997, it should look like that, kind of. Maybe a little bit better, but not much. And I think that's kind of genius because obviously, again, this is all the fabric of the metatext, the text, time itself just totally ceasing to exist. But this is what provides us that Misato moment, because I love that her and the Wonder still have a big role to play here. Same thing with Mari. It really comes down to Mari, Misato, and Shinji, right? Asuka's out of the picture for the moment. And I mean, Ritsuko isn't there, but it's like Misato says goodbye to Ritsuko. We get the path, this beautiful piece of music, because Misato knows I'm going down with this ship. I have one last thing to do for my sons. My son Shinji and my son Kaji Jr., who never met me, but this sacrifice will ensure my wish that he'll live in a world and get to grow up and be a person. And this is how I'll pay my debt to my other son in a sense, true son, Shinji, I'm going to turn the wonder into the spear he needs, because everything is still following rules of Ava Lord, even in the imaginary world, requires spears. The spears are what allows the powers, right? So you have the spear of Longinus and the spear of Cassius, and they say one represents hope, one represents despair, right? The two sort of polars. Gendo's already used them, so there's nothing else that can be done. His instrumentality can only be done by an additional spear that doesn't exist. But they realize you can make new spears with the right sort of, I guess, energy compacting, which the Wonder is able to do, being an Ava-based technology. So with Mari's help, they're going to take out the 4 atoms and then crash the Wonder into Ava Imaginary / giant CG Ray, pierce its eyeball, as always, and Ava imagery, to break the barrier into this imaginary Golgotha object world and deliver a new spear to Shinji, which he can then use to take control of instrumentality and save the world, right? So before that even happens, because I love the way it's kind of paced out and structured, we finally get it. We get our big Gendo download, complete with the classic music, which I'm so glad finally worked its way back to this movie, symbolizing that this is the rebuild where we get back to that psychological avant-garde exploration stuff, right? So we get our Gendo, and it was really fascinating to watch because it brought together so many things. Like, I always kind of assumed, Gendo is just another Shinji, just a Shinji down a different path, or another avatar for Anno, not just Anno's father, but Anno himself, and you really see that, this boy with glasses talking about reading alone and how knowledge was safe because it didn't matter what other people thought or the way other people's lies confused him. He didn't want to be around it because he didn't like how people would say one thing and mean another. And, someone with my particular background and experience growing up and my own struggles, I deeply connected to that sort of social frustration and, inability to feel like you could connect with other people and all that. And the way you kind of just turn inward to your obsessions and the way that can lead to a depression. And we, really understand the tragedy of him and Yui in a different light, a way that I wasn't even expecting, because I expected the tragedy of him and Yui to play some role here, but not like this. Because, we see constantly, and this is very notable, people didn't talk really about Mari yet and who Mari is. And I have more to say on it, but I just want to highlight that, Mari, as we learned in her little scene with Futsuki before this, Mari is someone that was around in the college years with Yui and Gendo. She's like 60 years old or some shit. Somehow she was de-aged and then stuck with the curse of the Ava or whatever. But the point is that she was there, and you constantly see her in the Gendo flashbacks, which I'm not the very stylized, hand brushstroke ones, black and white ones. I'm not so sure that it's just to remind you, yes, Mari was there. To some extent it is. But I think it's meant to, again, draw your attention to what Mari symbolizes, the meaning of Mari. Because she's there, and Gendo, again, I'm not saying it's trying to undermine Gendo's love for Yui, but it's just to remind you that Gendo's always turning away from Mari. Mari's always trying to wake Gendo up to her ways, and Gendo seemingly is too distracted, or stop it, annoying girl with glasses and big boobs. So he falls in love with Yui, and then he loses Yui. Now, how he loses Yui, the way Yui decides to go in Ava Unit 1, again, we have to use the end of Ava. I think it's the same thing. She wanted to be Ava, to be eternal for Shinji, and it's all that ties in. That's all still true. And as we're learning, this is all a time loop. This is all repeating itself. So Yui does this every single time, and Gendo's desperate to undo it every single time, but it never works. Interesting, right? So she reveals all this to Shinji, and then it finally gets to this beautiful moment where we get our callback music. We get our And this was such a brilliant bait and switch the way they did this with the actual ending, because we finally get, I was not expecting it, or I was not expecting it, but I just really wanted it. I was like, this can only end with that callback to that end of Ava scene, right? Where we have our music, that soft piano, like basically Yui's song music. And Shinji, like in the context of End of Ava, is like, I want to remember being born. And he's like, says goodbye to his mother, goodbye to the Ava, right? Saying goodbye to the Avas is in this movie as well. But in this context, we hear the callback to it to have this scene where Gendo finally realizes it's Gendo kind of in Shinji's position of like, no, Yui was there all along, not really in the Ava, but in Shinji himself. And so everything I've been doing was just so backwards. If I wanted Yui back, I had Shinji. And that's what I needed. And the moment where he turns around and we see him finally, obviously it's in the context of instrumentality and imaginary, but like him imagining a world where he didn't just send Shinji away on that train and instead embraced him. It's a very powerful image. And when Gendo snaps out of that, he just exits the train. Then all of a sudden Kaworu's there. And Shinji's like, Kaworu even acknowledges, Shinji, seems like all your problems are solved. So there's nothing really instrumentality can do for you. And he's like, no, yeah, that's true, but I'm going to solve other people's problems. So he goes to Asuka. And this is where we get our Asuka revelation. That yes, Asuka Shikinami, as she's known in Rebuild, is the part of the Shikinami series, a series of clones. Now, exact origin of these clones and the mythology behind this, I'll admit, is still unclear to me. I've heard competing theories that equally make different amounts of sense to me. Not sure, really. I guess I would say there may have been an Asuka Langley Soryu in this reality, but she died. Maybe she was like killed along with her mother, and then they used her as the basis for the Shikinami series. And I still think little Shikinami genuinely saw little Shinji with Gendo and Yui when Nerve came to visit this cold environment, which again is a little interesting because in the original NGE, at least in Japan, which may still be true, it's implied that there are no more seasons because of the second impact. Here, it seems that there's at least cold weather somewhere. Wherever they are, it's unclear. Maybe they're all the way in the North Pole or something. No, well, they're wherever Euronerve is, I guess, which still should be Germany. But yeah, so we get Asuka's training, and another brilliant piece of music by Shiro Sugisu that accompanies this sequence. And we realized that Asuka just wanted someone to look out for her, and that person ended up being Kensuke. And Shinji's like, I understand you now, Asuka, which brings them back to the beach at the end of Ava. And this is our first real, at this point chronologically in the movie, like, yes, all this is tied together. Kaworu's scene is going to come next, but all is tied together, and Asuka suddenly bursting out of her plug suit because she's adult Asuka. See, what's happening here is the instrumentality is the cure to the curse of the Ava. It's how you grow up. You need to grow. You need to actually grow in your mind to grow in your body, essentially. And you need to let go of Evangelion. You need to let go of the units, the pilots, all that comes with it. By letting that go, you will break the curse of Ava and grow up. And obviously the metaphor here is obvious. This is what I was trying to set up in the beginning when talking about 3.0 and the rebuilds, the nature of it. What Anno is trying to do here is say, Ava fans, Ava people, even to myself, we need to let this go. Only by letting go can we actually move forward with our lives. Only then can the curse of Ava is the curse to want to be stuck back into this little bubble of 1995, 1997 and never leave it, right? So we break free of that. So Asuka bursts out of her plug suit, breaks free, and Shinji gets to have his reciprocated moment of being like, I liked you too. And it kind of puts that satisfying end on, who knows what happened after the end of Ava. I mean, I think that this film has an interesting answer that the end of Ava actually wasn't instrumentality over. It might have continued on to a version of what we were going to see in this film, but Shinji makes a different choice, right? So bringing that back to Kaworu, this is where Shinji gets to have Kaworu's kind of confrontation. And this ties in a couple of things. Kaworu's love of Shinji is basically the gear that keeps the time loop going, right? Kaworu is an eternal existence. He's the first angel and the last angel. So he's the last to die and the first to be born. He always exists, essentially. He is Adam. He is the first ancestral race personified. He is existing always, essentially. Hard to wrap your brain around, but that seems to be the implication. And he awakens when he awakens, and his awakening is not even really an awakening. It's just a reboot, but he's all there. He's all present. His mind is not changed. And he just wakes up, as we see at the end of 1.0. It's like, oh, great. Here we go again. Time to go find Shinji and do this whole story again. As the world resets over. And we never get a full explanation of Rei Q, by the way, in this film, but I think it gives you a lot to chew on. And we do see her briefly at one point, or a few points. Rei Q is the Rei we see at the end, sort of Ayanami after the Ayanami, who, like Kaworu, is this sort of out of time, eternal existence that just kind of like when Shinji's ready to end the product and start time over, kind of snaps their fingers, and all of a sudden the whole thing unravels and re-ravels back to the point where the series starts, with variations that are just, I guess, maybe random of the multiverse or part of the Eva imaginary. They are the fourth wall. They are Anno's story intentions. Who the fuck knows? It's kind of the whole point is that these are distinctions without difference, and it doesn't really matter. It's just how it happens, right? So it's everything from the Golgotha object, I suppose. But yeah, Kaworu, we understand Kaworu's character, that his so-called I want Shinji to be happy thing is not really meaningful. And this is why the loop persists, because he keeps being like, oh, I just want Shinji to be happy, but really he just wants to be happy. And so everything he does is just ensuring that this loop continues, so he'll go see Shinji again with no growth. So his version of the Curse of the Eva, in other words, is that he just repeats the same loop so he can have his little time with Shinji playing around, but he's not really interested in Shinji growing up and changing. He wants Shinji to be the needy emo boy that he has his role to play with. He doesn't want Shinji. So that's why he's immediately like, oh, Shinji, you're different. I don't know if I like it. That's the issue here. And his relationship with Kaji in the context of this is interesting. Now, my feeling is that the stuff with Kaji is kind of almost just bait to have this 14-year time skip exploration. So that's why it's kind of confusing and jumbled. But my basic best interpretation is that Kaworu came down from the moon when the third impact was initiated by Shinji, stopped it, then took over Nerve as Gendo and Futsuki fled or disappeared. And then Kaji was working for him. Meanwhile, he was secretly starting Relay to rebel against Nerve. And Kaworu was trying to play benevolent Nerve, but it ended up not mattering because the Lilith at the bottom of the Terminal Dogma ended up reacting either because of something Gendo did or something that was just inevitable. And Kaworu descended to the Terminal Dogma to stop it, but it was too much. He couldn't do anything about it. And then Kaji had to fly some copter in it that he already spray painted Relay on, and told Masato basically everything about Relay as being some secret project on his part, to create an ark for animals. And that's what the whole ocean facility that he took people to 2.0 was about, I guess. And, again, he's still allied with Kaworu. He still respects Kaworu, but it's Kaworu, the reason, and maybe that's the implication. It's not that Kaworu directly meant to restart the near third impact, but his just existence is tied to it. He's waiting for Shinji. So he has to kind of play these roles, and Kaji kind of is aware of it, so he stops Kaworu by sacrificing himself. And then the 14 years or whatever pass, and Shinji suddenly crash lands from space with Eva Unit 1. I don't even know how he got up there. Maybe it had something to do with what was happening in the Terminal Dogma or something else. I don't fucking know. We'll have to find out, I guess, on some ancillary material. Either way, Kaworu is finally able to let go, which only leaves Shinji alone in this motion capture studio, clearly a recreation of the very motion capture studio Anno was working on the film in with the PlayStation controller cameras and the special effects movie suit versions of the Evas and Kensuke up there. And it's very reminiscent of the stage lights and behind the scene thing they're doing in the instrumentality as seen in episode 25 and 26 and a little bit in End of Eva. And it's just Rei there. And that's where you get the whole Neon Genesis. The projector plays the original show, all the episode title cards. And Shinji straight up says, I'm not going to restart time. I'm actually going to end Evangelion. I mean, the meta on point, literal is just so great, so brilliant. I'm going to time to end Evangelion. I'm here to end it. But ending it is not an ending. It's a Neon Genesis, a new beginning. So boom, he initiates the spear, Voyager, the track comes on. And then we get that brilliant bait and switch. Because remember how I said, oh, they did the end of Eva music earlier with Gendo, but we still get the fucking moment in the red water with Yui. And this time it's like, I'm stopping the spear, because I guess Shinji's spear was going to sacrifice him. He would, Jesus, all the biblical imagery, he would die. But Yui, his mother, was there to protect him. And Gendo's there to protect her. So they finally are able to die in each other's arms and move on. And Shinji realized that's really all his father wanted, is that every time in this time loop, Yui would go into Unit 1 and she was like, yes, the Ava's forever, but she was just separated from Gendo, and Gendo could never be with her. His instrumentality would fail every time. He never with her. But because of what Shinji did, Gendo actually ended up getting what he wanted, and he's with her because they're together. Ava Unit 1 and 13, all Avas, rather than continue to exist and drift off in space forever, they can finally move on, but move on together. Gendo and Yui moving on together, father and mother move on together. And that's the difference. End to Ava is not the end. It's the incomplete. This is the final. This is the complete. So all the Ava units, except for Mari's units, notably, disappear. All of a sudden, Shinji's on the beach water, because when he rises out of the red water, it's no longer red, it's blue, because the entirety of Third Impact is undone. The Earth's restored, and you still see the Relay arc thing. So it's almost like, hey, we can go colonize some other planets. Maybe that's almost like a new version of the first ancestral race and the seeds of life. Notably, they call the Relay arc pods seeds of life. See, they become the new first ancestral race in a weird way. Now that the loop's over, humanity's free to be the first ancestral race for a future civilization, potentially. Anyway, the Earth's back to blue. Shinji's on the water, but he's still because it's unclear. Is he in the Golgotha object or is he back in the real world? And I'd say the answer is both and neither at the same time. Again, imaginary and real have blurred together. I think what we're seeing of the outside Earth and of Kensuke, where Asuka's entry plug seems to have crash landed, that's all for sure real world. But where Shinji is, it's like, yes, it's real world, but it's also, and when I say real world, I mean the Ava world, not like the real world live action world. And I know some people have some theories and thoughts about that. I kind of see it a little differently, which is to the point I'm making. It's like the real world is where Shinji is the world of Ava, but because he's still, instrumentality is kind of just seeped out. The Golgotha, all of it, it's kind of one thing. And as a result, that kind of gives Anno his avant-garde ability to yes, I'm going to show you the Ava animation breaking down, as though even though Shinji was saved by Yui and Gendo, it's not enough. He's going to fade back into existence. He's still young Shinji, and he's just going to dissolve. The waves coming in, the blue waves are going to dissolve back into thumbnail storyboard sketches, and he himself is going to throw up thumbnail story sketches until what? He sees Mari. He sees Mari in Unity 8 crash down. Unit 8 and all the subunits it absorbed, 9, 10, 12, and 12, aka, as she says, goodbye, final, you did well, or sorry, what she says is, you did well, final Evangelion. Again, another meta line, obviously. That dissolves, she fucking whips up her hair like a little mermaid, and Shinji runs towards her, and then boom, crash cut to the last scene. Which, again, before I unpack that last scene, let me just say, what I'm saying is going on here is Mari is the key. Mari is the key to everything. I know this upsets some people because of whatever, but I got news for you. Whether Anno thought it was going to be true when he invented Mari or not, This is their creative process, and this is where I ended up. Mari is the key to everything. She had nothing to do with Shinji's change up until this point. We already articulated that. It had to do with Kensuke and Asuka and building these relationships and Rei lookalike and his Shinji's own self-actualization. But in terms of the end and the note that Anno is trying to bring this on, Mari is the key. That Mari was here just to get to this. Because what we see is Shinji now on the train station. He's grown up. His curse of Eva is finally broken. Everyone's curse of Eva is finally broken. Again, my interpretation of the scene, despite the use of live action in the final shot, is this is the Eva world, but it's the Eva world that's not the Eva world. It's the Eva world free of Evangelions, where the pilots are grown up, the curse is broken, right? We actually see Asuka on the same train platform, just kind of in the background. We clearly see adult Kaworu and Rei there, which is interesting, right? And then Mari comes up to Shinji. And Shinji still has his DSS choker on, right? And she's like, you still smell good. But he's like, yo, girl with big boobs, glasses. Very cool. Shinji's just like, yeah, I'm not afraid to say it. She takes off the collar, and that's when one last kiss kicks in. And the whole idea is like, yes, I am a grown-up. And he's like, let's go. Like, let's go bang our fucking brains out. Because again, and I don't think this is unfair to say, Mari is an overtly sexual character. That's what we see even when she makes her reintroduction with Asuka, with all her butt shots and all her talking about, oh, don't you want to hook up with Shinji? Like, look at my big boobs. It's on purpose. It's not just, quote, fan service, though it is a kind of fan service. It's fan service in the sense that Anno is trying to use Mari to say something. And yes, Mari is meant to symbolize his wife to a large extent. But it's not just his wife. It's what he views as his wife's message. There's a quote from Anno that I'd like to read in reference to his wife and her work. What's amazing about my wife's manga is that she doesn't create any out from reality. Most manga these days are no more than a device to provide readers with a refuge from reality to satisfy them out there. The bigger fans they are, the more likely they'll become one with the fantasy and have difficulty accepting anything else. My wife's manga leaves a bit of energy to readers as they return to the real world. Instead of making you want to dwell in yourself, her manga makes you want to go out and outside and do something. It emboldens you. It's a manga for tackling reality and living among others. My wife lives like that, and I think that that's why she can write like that. Her manga accomplished what I couldn't do in Eva to the end. It was a big shock to me, really. Now that quote, think about everything it's saying there. And this was before he created the final film. But it's so clear that the final film and the purpose of Mari and the purpose of Mari in the ending, and therefore the purpose of Mari period, is to represent Anno's effort to finally do that. And to do it in a way that he believes his viewers are going to experience, whether they're fully aware of it or not. The end of this movie is Mari taking Shinji by the hand, but then ultimately Shinji leading, right? Because he's like, no, he steps out in front of him. He's like, no, let's go. Let's go run into reality, which is why it's live action. It's not that, oh, now they're in the real world. No. It's that the world they live in is now a reality to actually step out into. And that's a call to action for us, the audience, Anno's audience, to say, no, step out into reality, because the real life is out there. And the movie actually shows you that. It doesn't just smack that on you in the end and have a different message throughout. That's what Act One's about. It's, hey, connection, have purpose, be out there, experience nature, experience life. And what Mari and the sexualization of Mari represent is not just sexualized. Sex is a part of life. In fact, it's the most life of life. So the idea that Shinji's running off to have sex with a girl with big tits is him choosing life. It's like, think of the end of Train Spotting. Choose life. That's what Anno's saying. You can spend all day internally investigating yourself and wallowing in yourself, and that's the gateway to depression. And it's not just, I understand it's not just as simple as snapping your fingers and making it happen. But if you at least start to think about how you can choose life, you will eventually choose it. That's what happened to Shinji. He went through the fucking ringer and came out the other side and said, you know what? I'm going to choose life. And that's really quite literal with Anno. And anyone who struggles with suicidal depression, it's to say, No, I have something to live for, and it's out there. It's not, I could spend all day inside and never understand myself, because fundamentally, as human beings, whether we like it or not, we're not meant to be here alone. Suicide is a call to help from yourself. It's a saying like something's fundamentally wrong. And if something's this wrong and this hopeless and this despairing, why would we stay here? Like, we might as well just get it over with. But that's never the full reality. Your body, as much as it's telling you the truth, it's not telling you to end you. It's telling you to, hey, I don't know why you're telling me to end me. I want you to get out there. And we need to be able to hear that. And we need to be able to look around us and step up and get out there. And I understand it's not easy. And I understand the complexity. And I think Anno understands that better than anybody. And Eva understands that. So when people act like Eva, the final film, just shortcutted its way to its ending, I reject that. Every step of the way was important, including the original continuity. And certainly the real life time. And this is a story about time. It's a story about saying, oh, time was compressed and time was stuck, but here's time being unstuck. And time being unstuck is life being unstuck, and change and growth being unstuck. And that's what we need. By changing and growing, we can avert despair. There's always hope if there's growth. As long as you can grow, you can have that hope. And that's what you need to keep going and to grow in and of itself. That affirmative message of Evangelion isn't something to actually cherish. So as much as I might love the mollywop depression hit of End of Eva, I've always rejected the notion that End of Eva was a not a happy ending. I understand tonally, but like the point was Shinji was choosing life in that movie as well. The difference is there's a difference between choosing life and being like, I don't know how I get there, I just know that I'm supposed to. And choosing life being like, I've gotten there, I've been there, I know how to get there, and I want to get others there too. And that's what life's about. It's not about me. I need to fix me before I can help other people, but that's the reason to fix me. The reason to fix me is so I can actually be a light for someone else, because other people were lights for me, and that's how I got out. So it's about paying it forward, and it's about a service. And I don't mean to get preachy with all this, but I think that in order to really unpack what this final movie and the journey of Evangelion is about, we need to actually be able to contend with that. Well, okay. Yeah, so what do I think of the movie? I think it's a fucking masterpiece. What do you want me to say? It's a fucking masterpiece. Anno, the crazy son of a bitch, fucking did it. Bravo to you, brother. Bravo to your wife. Bravo to everyone at Kara, all your co-directors and animators and the brilliant people that struggled while you, struggled with yourself. But all the Eva fans, everyone, thank you, including to myself. Thank me for coming onto the train late, but fucking cherishing every moment. And thank you to all the people that were there back in 95 or 96. Thank you. Thank you and goodbye. Goodbye, all Evangelion. Congratulations.